What if a single decision could unravel secrets, challenge perceptions, and forge an unbreakable bond? This is the story of Khalid Al Farouk, an Arab billionaire who bought an African woman in a controversial auction. But what happened next will leave you stunned and deeply moved. Before we dive in, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and hit the notification bell so you never miss a story that will move your heart and inspire your soul. Now, let's begin. The city of Dubai glimmered under the moonlight, its towering skyscrapers reflecting wealth and ambition. Khalid Al Farouk, a tech mogul whose name carried weight across the Middle East, stared out of his penthouse window, a glass of sparkling water in hand. His life, built on relentless work and sharp decisions, had brought him riches beyond imagination. Yet, in the silence of his success, an emptiness lingered, a void he could neither name nor escape. An invitation lay on the table behind him, gilded and embossed with the signature of one of the most exclusive charity events in Dubai. It was an annual auction where the city's elite bid on unique items, experiences, or services, with proceeds going to various causes. Khalid had no intention of attending, but something about the night felt different. A restless curiosity pushed him to change his mind. Dressed in a tailored black suit, Khalid arrived at the event, greeted by chandeliers that sparkled like diamonds and a crowd adorned in their finest attire. Conversations buzzed around him, deals being discussed, alliances being forged, but Khalid remained an observer, detached and disinterested. The auction began, offering luxury yachts, rare artifacts, and private island experiences. The room's energy swelled with each bid, but nothing caught Khalid's attention. That was until the auctioneer introduced something, or rather someone, unusual. "She is Amara," the auctioneer announced, gesturing toward the stage. "A talented young woman from Africa whose family has fallen on hard times. This auction will grant her an opportunity to repay their debts and secure their future. The winning bidder will have her as a personal assistant for 1 year." Gasps rippled through the room. This wasn't a typical item for auction. Khalid's sharp eyes shifted toward the stage, where Amara stood. Her figure was petite but commanding, her posture straight despite the humiliation of her situation. Her dark skin glowed under the stage lights, and her eyes, bold and unyielding, seemed to pierce through the room, daring anyone to pity her. Khalid felt a strange pull. It wasn't desire, nor was it pity. It was something deeper, more instinctual, as if her presence struck a chord he didn't know existed. The murmurs around him grew louder as the bidding began. 2,000 dirhams, someone called. 5,000. The numbers climbed quickly, and Amara's face remained unreadable. Khalid's hand hovered, his mind racing. Why was he drawn to this moment? Why did he feel as though walking away wasn't an option? 50,000 dirhams, Khalid said, his voice slicing through the chatter. The room fell silent. Eyes turned toward him, a mix of admiration and confusion flickering across their faces. Khalid Al Farouk rarely made public moves, let alone ones as unexpected as this. The auctioneer's hammer fell. "Sold to Mr. Khalid Al Farouk." As the crowd erupted in murmurs, Khalid approached the stage. Amara met his gaze, her expression unreadable but her eyes brimming with defiance. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice steady, almost challenging. "You don't need to thank me," Khalid replied, unsure why his own voice sounded so soft. The night ended with Khalid signing the necessary papers. As Amara followed him to his car, the weight of his decision settled over him. He had bought her freedom, yes, but he hadn't anticipated the mysteries she carried with her. As the car pulled away into the night, Khalid stole a glance at Amara. She stared out the window, her expression distant yet calm. For the first time in a long while, Khalid felt the stirrings of something unfamiliar, anticipation, perhaps even unease. Unbeknownst to him, this decision would unravel secrets he wasn't prepared to face and challenge the very foundations of his carefully constructed life. The sleek black car glided through the glittering streets of Dubai, the city alive with lights that mirrored Khalid's chaotic thoughts. Sitting in the back seat, he found his eyes drifting toward Amara. She sat composed beside him, her hands resting neatly in her lap, her gaze fixed firmly out the window as if she were memorizing every detail of this unfamiliar world. Khalid had always prided himself on being decisive, on acting with precision and intent. Yet tonight, as the car hummed softly beneath them, he found himself questioning his actions. Why had he bid on her? What had compelled him to spend an amount of money he wouldn't have blinked at but on something, or someone he didn't truly understand? As the car turned into the long, winding driveway leading to his sprawling estate, the tension in the air was almost palpable. Khalid cleared his throat, breaking the silence. "Amara," he began, his voice low but firm. "I'm not sure how much you know about the arrangement, but you'll stay here for now. You'll have everything you need, and you'll work directly under my guidance." Amara turned her head slowly, her eyes meeting his with quiet defiance. "I understand the terms, Mr. Al-Farouk," she said, her voice steady, calm, yet tinged with an edge that caught him off guard. Her tone wasn't submissive, nor was it combative. It was as if she were setting boundaries without uttering the words. Khalid wasn't used to being challenged, especially not by someone in her position, and it intrigued him in ways he wasn't prepared to admit. The car stopped, and the driver opened the door for them. Khalid stepped out first, adjusting his cufflinks out of habit, before offering a hand to Amara. She hesitated for the briefest moment before taking it, her touch light but firm. The estate sprawled before them, a marvel of modern architecture and luxury. Marble steps led to massive glass doors, and the scent of fresh jasmine wafted through the air from the surrounding gardens. For a moment, Amara's composure faltered, her eyes widening slightly as she took in the grandeur. But just as quickly, she masked her awe, lifting her chin as she followed Khalid inside. The foyer was just as grand, with high ceilings and a cascading chandelier that sparkled like a constellation. Khalid motioned for a housekeeper, a middle-aged woman named Hala, who had been with him for years. "Hala," he said, "show Amara to her quarters. Make sure she has everything she needs." Hala nodded, her sharp eyes flickering briefly toward Amara. "Of course, Mr. Al-Farouk. This way, please." Amara followed Hala without a word, her back straight and her steps measured. Khalid watched her retreating figure, his thoughts a jumble of curiosity and unease. He didn't know what he expected from her, but she was already proving to be more complex than he had imagined. Once alone, Khalid poured himself a glass of aged whiskey, sinking into a leather armchair in his study. The events of the evening replayed in his mind, her defiance, her grace under pressure, the way her eyes seemed to hold an entire world of secrets. He couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to her story, something beyond the auction and the debts she was supposedly there to repay. And for reasons he couldn't explain, he wanted to know. Meanwhile, Amara stood in her new room, a space larger than any she had ever seen. The walls were painted a soft cream, adorned with minimalist art, and the bed was a luxurious canopy draped with pristine white linens. A large window overlooked the estate's gardens, the moonlight casting silver shadows on the floor. Hala stood near the door, watching her carefully. "If you need anything, just let me know," she said, her tone polite but distant. "Thank you," Amara replied, her voice neutral. Once Hala left, Amara sat on the edge of the bed, her hands gripping the edge tightly. The grandeur around her felt surreal, almost suffocating. Her mind raced with questions. What had she truly gotten herself into? Who was Khalid Al-Farouk beyond the stoic man with piercing eyes? She couldn't forget the way he had looked at her during the auction, as if he saw something others didn't. But she also couldn't afford to trust him, or anyone else. Not yet. As the hours ticked by, Amara found herself standing by the window, staring out at the moonlit gardens. For the first time in years, she felt a strange mixture of hope and fear, unsure which one would win out. Downstairs, Khalid remained in his study, the untouched glass of whiskey in his hand. He stared out at the same gardens, his mind fixed on Amara. What secrets did she hold? And why did he feel as though uncovering them might also unravel something within himself? As the night deepened, two strangers, bound by an unexpected twist of fate, found themselves staring into the unknown, separate yet inextricably tied by the journey ahead. The following days unfolded quietly, but the air between Khalid and Amara was charged with an unspoken tension. Khalid, usually buried in his work, found his focus faltering. He couldn't help but notice the quiet confidence with which Amara carried herself as she adjusted to her new surroundings. She interacted with his staff politely yet distantly, as if keeping a carefully calculated distance from everyone. From his office window, Khalid often watched her wander through the estate's gardens, her steps unhurried, her gaze lingering on the flowers and fountains. It was as if she found solace there, yet something about her posture betrayed a wariness she couldn't quite hide. One afternoon, unable to contain his curiosity any longer, Khalid decided to join her. He found her seated on a stone bench beneath a sprawling jacaranda tree, the violet petals creating a soft carpet around her. She didn't look up as he approached, but seemed aware of his presence. "This is my favorite part of the estate," Khalid said, breaking the silence. Amara glanced at him, her expression neutral. "It's beautiful, peaceful." He sat down on the other end of the bench, giving her space. "You've been quiet since you arrived. I imagine this transition hasn't been easy." She tilted her head slightly, studying him. "I've learned that quiet observation is often safer than speaking." Her words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Khalid hesitated before replying, his voice softer than usual. "You don't need to be on guard here. No one will harm you." Amara's lips curved into a faint, almost bittersweet smile. "Forgive me, Mr. Al-Farouk, but that's a promise I've heard before." Her response unsettled him, though he didn't show it. There was a weight in her tone, a history she carried that he couldn't ignore. "Call me Khalid," he said after a pause. Amara blinked, surprised by the sudden informality. "Very well. Khalid." The way she said his name, with measured deliberation, sent a strange warmth through him. For a moment he considered pressing her about her past, but the guarded look in her eyes warned him against it. Instead, he changed the subject. "I noticed you spend a lot of time in the gardens. Do you enjoy nature?" She nodded, her gaze softening. "Back home, I used to help my grandmother tend to her garden. It wasn't as grand as this, of course, but it was ours. She used to say that flowers teach us patience. They bloom when they're ready, not when we want them to." Her words carried a melancholy that Khalid couldn't ignore. "And your grandmother? Is she still—" "She passed away a few years ago," Amara interrupted gently, her voice steady but tinged with sadness. "She was the one who raised me. My parents. Well, they weren't around much." Khalid felt a pang of regret for bringing up what was clearly a sensitive subject. "I'm sorry," he said sincerely. Amara nodded, accepting his apology, though her eyes drifted toward the fountain ahead of them. "She taught me how to survive, how to hold my head high even when the world tries to push you down. That's why I'm here, to make sure her sacrifices weren't in vain." Khalid was struck by her resilience, the quiet strength that radiated from her. She wasn't just a woman forced into an unfair situation. She was a fighter, someone who had faced adversity and refused to let it break her. As the days turned into weeks, Khalid and Amara began to interact more frequently. Their conversations remained guarded at first, but slowly, walls began to crumble. Khalid found himself drawn to her wit and intellect, the way she spoke with a mix of caution and courage. Amara, in turn, noticed glimpses of vulnerability beneath Khalid's polished exterior. One evening, as they sat in the library, Khalid shared a rare piece of his own history. "My parents wanted me to follow a very different path," he admitted, leaning back in his chair. "They wanted me to become a lawyer, to take over the family's legal empire, but I chose technology instead. It caused a rift that never fully healed." Amara listened intently, her gaze steady. "Do you regret it?" "Not the choice itself," Khalid said, "but I regret not finding a way to make them understand. My father passed away before we could reconcile, and my mother, well, she tolerates me now, but it's not the same." For the first time, Amara saw a flicker of pain in Khalid's usually composed expression. It was a reminder that beneath his wealth and power, he was just as human as anyone else. "You can't change the past," she said gently, "but you can decide how it shapes your future." Her words lingered with him long after their conversation ended. Khalid began to realize that Amara wasn't just someone he had helped, she was becoming someone who was helping him in return. Yet, as their bond grew, so did the weight of the secrets Amara carried. Khalid sensed there was more to her story, something she wasn't ready to share. And though he wanted to give her the space she needed, he couldn't shake the feeling that those secrets would eventually come to light, whether she wanted them to or not. The estate was quiet as dusk settled, painting the gardens in soft hues of orange and purple. Khalid sat in his study, reviewing reports from his company, but his focus drifted. His thoughts kept returning to Amara, her resilience, her guarded nature, and the way she seemed to carry a world of pain beneath her calm exterior. Khalid had spent weeks observing her, their conversations becoming more open with time. Yet, despite the moments of connection, there were still barriers she refused to lower. He respected her privacy, but curiosity gnawed at him. Who was Amara before she arrived here? What had brought her to the auction? His musings were interrupted by a soft knock at the door. "Come in," Khalid called, expecting Hala or another staff member. To his surprise, it was Amara. She stepped inside, her hands clasped in front of her. Her expression was calm, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of uncertainty. "I hope I'm not disturbing you," she said quietly. "Not at all," Khalid replied, setting his tablet aside. "Please, sit." Amara hesitated for a moment before taking the chair across from him. The warm light from the desk lamp cast a soft glow on her face, highlighting her delicate features. "I wanted to thank you," she began, her voice steady, "for how you've treated me since I arrived. I know this arrangement isn't ideal, but you've shown me kindness I didn't expect." Khalid leaned forward, resting his forearms on the desk. "You don't need to thank me, Amara. What happened to you wasn't right. I only wish I could do more." Amara's gaze dropped to her lap, her fingers twisting nervously. "You've done more than you realize," she said softly. There was a pause, the weight of her words hanging in the air. Khalid sensed she was holding something back, and for the first time, he decided to press. "Amara," he said gently, "I've tried to respect your privacy, but I can see there's more to your story. If there's anything you want to share, I'm here to listen." She looked up at him, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. For a moment, it seemed as though she might retreat, but then she took a deep breath, as if summoning her courage. "I didn't just end up at that auction by chance," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "My family. We were targeted. My father took out loans to pay for my brother's medical treatment, and when he couldn't repay them, the lenders came for us. They threatened to hurt my family unless I agreed to work off the debt." Khalid's jaw tightened, anger flashing in his eyes. "They exploited your desperation." Amara nodded, her expression weary. "I didn't have a choice. I couldn't let my family suffer, so I agreed. The auction was their way of ensuring they'd get the highest payment for my labor." Khalid's hands curled into fists as he listened. The injustice of it all made his blood boil. "Do you know who these people are?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous. Amara hesitated. "Yes, but it doesn't matter. They're powerful, connected. People like them don't face consequences." "Not if they're left unchecked," Khalid said firmly. "I can help you, Amara. We can make this right." Her eyes widened, fear mingling with hope. "You'd do that? For me?" Khalid leaned back, his expression softening. "You deserve justice. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's that power should be used to protect, not exploit." For the first time, a tear slipped down Amara's cheek. She quickly wiped it away, but the vulnerability in her eyes was unmistakable. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice breaking. Khalid stood and walked around the desk, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We'll start tomorrow," he said, "but for tonight, rest. You've carried this burden long enough." As Amara left the study, A new determination settled over Khalid. He didn't just want to help her, he needed to. For the first time in years, he felt a sense of purpose beyond his work, a drive to make a real difference in someone's life. Upstairs, Amara stood by her window, staring out at the moonlit gardens. A small, fragile hope began to take root in her heart, a hope that perhaps, with Khalid's help, she might finally reclaim the freedom she thought she'd lost forever. The morning dawned crisp and bright, but for Khalid and Amara, the weight of their shared mission hung heavy in the air. Khalid had spent the early hours poring over documents and making discreet calls to contacts he trusted. If they were going to face the shadowy figures who had exploited Amara, they needed a plan, and Khalid was determined to leave nothing to chance. Amara entered the study just as Khalid was finishing a call. She looked more composed than the night before, though her hands clenched slightly at her sides as if steadying herself for what lay ahead. "Good morning," Khalid said, offering her a reassuring smile. "Good morning," she replied, her voice steady. "I'm ready to do whatever it takes." Khalid admired her resilience, but he also saw the fear beneath it. "You've already done more than most would in your position," he said. "From here, I'll handle the risk, but I'll need you to tell me everything you know about these people, their names, where they operate, anything that might help." Amara hesitated for a moment before nodding. "The man in charge is named Bakari. He's not just a lender, he runs an entire network. They prey on vulnerable families, trapping them in endless cycles of debt. He operates out of Nairobi, but he has people everywhere, including here in Dubai." Khalid listened intently, his mind racing with possibilities. If Bakari is operating internationally, he's likely using illegal channels to move money. That gives us an opening to expose him. But we'll need proof. Amara's brow furrowed. "I know where he keeps his records, or at least I did a few months ago. He has a private office in Nairobi where he keeps files on everyone he targets. If we could access them—" "It's a start," Khalid interrupted. "But getting to those files won't be easy." "I'm willing to go back if it means stopping him," Amara said, her voice firm. Khalid's expression darkened. "Absolutely not. You've done enough. I won't let you put yourself in harm's way again." Amara opened her mouth to protest, but the intensity in his gaze stopped her. There was no room for argument. "Then how do we get to him?" she asked, her voice quieter now. "I'll send someone I trust," Khalid replied. "I have contacts in Nairobi who can gather the information we need. Once we have enough evidence, we'll expose him to the authorities." Amara nodded, though doubt flickered in her eyes. "And if the authorities don't act? People like Bakari don't just disappear because the law says so." Khalid leaned forward, his voice low but resolute. "If the law fails, we'll find another way. I promise you, Amara, he won't get away with this." The next few days were a whirlwind of preparation. Khalid's team worked tirelessly to track Bakari's network, piecing together a web of names, accounts, and transactions. Amara watched from the sidelines, a mix of gratitude and disbelief washing over her. She had spent so long believing no one could or would help her, and so now, for the first time, she saw a glimmer of hope. Late one evening, as the estate grew quiet, Amara found Khalid in the library. He was seated at a large oak desk, papers spread out before him, his brow furrowed in concentration. She hesitated in the doorway, unsure whether to interrupt, but he looked up and gestured for her to come in. "You're still working," she said, sitting in the chair opposite him. "There's a lot to untangle," Khalid admitted, leaning back in his chair. "But we're making progress. My contacts in Nairobi have already uncovered some of Bakari's operations. It's only a matter of time before we have enough to take him down." Amara studied him for a moment, her expression softening. "You've done so much for me, Khalid. More than I ever expected. I don't know how I'll ever repay you." "You don't need to repay me," Khalid said, his voice gentle. "This isn't about debt or obligation. It's about doing what's right." Amara smiled faintly, but her eyes glistened with unshed tears. Not many people would go to these lengths for someone they barely know. Khalid met her gaze, his expression serious. "You deserve better than what life has given you, Amara, and if I can help you get it, that's enough for me." For a moment, the room fell silent, the weight of their unspoken emotions filling the space. Then, Amara broke the silence, her voice barely above a whisper. "You remind me of my grandmother," she said. "She always believed in helping others even when it cost her. She used to say, 'We rise by lifting others.'" Khalid's lips curved into a small smile. "Your grandmother sounds like a wise woman." "She was," Amara said, her voice thick with emotion. "I just hope I can live up to her example." "You already have," Khalid said softly. The next morning, Khalid's phone buzzed with a message from his contact in Nairobi. They had obtained critical evidence, detailed records of Bakari's dealings, including names, bank accounts, and locations of key operations. It was exactly what they needed to take to the authorities. Khalid shared the news with Amara over breakfast, her eyes lighting up with hope for the first time in weeks. "Does this mean it's over?" she asked, barely daring to believe it. "Not yet," Khalid replied. "But it's the beginning of the end. With this evidence, we can build a case strong enough to bring him down." Amara reached across the table, placing her hand over his. "Thank you," she said, her voice trembling, "for everything." Khalid covered her hand with his own, meeting her gaze. "This is just the start, Amara. We're not finished yet." The evidence Khalid's team had uncovered was damning, a trove of documents that exposed Bakari's vast and insidious network. Bank transactions revealed millions laundered through shell companies. Photographs, testimonies, and contracts tied his organization to dozens of exploited families, including Amara's. The weight of the proof left no doubt. Bakari's empire was built on the suffering of the vulnerable. For Khalid, this wasn't just about justice anymore, it was personal. He had seen the toll Bakari's cruelty had taken on Amara, and it fueled his determination to bring the man down. He arranged a meeting with his legal team and government contacts, ensuring the evidence would reach the right hands. But Khalid knew that even with the law involved, Bakari wouldn't go down without a fight. The day of action arrived with an air of quiet tension. Khalid's estate became a command center, with his most trusted team members coordinating efforts to alert authorities in both Dubai and Nairobi. Amara stayed close, her nerves evident in the way she paced the halls. "Khalid," she said, finding him in his study, "what if this doesn't work? What if he escapes justice like so many others?" He stood and walked toward her, his expression resolute. "We've prepared for that. If the authorities fail, I have other means to ensure Bakari won't harm anyone again." She frowned. "Other means? What does that mean?" Khalid hesitated before answering. "Let's just say I've called in favors from people who operate outside the law. Sometimes justice requires unconventional methods." Amara's stomach churned at the thought, but she nodded. "Just promise me it won't cost you more than it already has." Khalid's eyes softened. "I promise." Hours later, the operation was in full swing. In Nairobi, local police raided Bakari's office, seizing files, computers, and arresting several of his associates. Khalid's contact on the ground kept him updated, feeding live reports of the unfolding events. But Bakari wasn't at the office. The news hit Khalid like a blow. He clenched his fists, frustration simmering beneath his calm exterior. "Find him," he ordered, his voice cold. His contact confirmed that Bakari had fled, likely tipped off by someone within his network. However, they had a lead, a private airstrip outside Nairobi where Bakari had reportedly arranged transport to leave the country. "Let's go," Khalid said, grabbing his jacket. Amara's eyes widened. "You're going there?" "I can't sit here and wait," Khalid replied. "This ends now." Amara hesitated, then stepped forward. "I'm coming with you." "No," Khalid said firmly. "It's too dangerous." "I'm not staying behind," she countered. "This is my fight, too." He saw the determination in her eyes and knew he couldn't change her mind. With a reluctant nod, he motioned for her to follow. The flight to Nairobi was tense. Khalid used the time to coordinate with his team and local authorities while Amara sat quietly, her thoughts racing. She couldn't believe how far things had come since that night at the auction. The man she'd once seen as just another wealthy bystander had become her greatest ally, risking everything to help her reclaim her life. When they landed, a car was waiting to take them to the airstrip. Khalid's contact briefed them during the drive. Bakari was expected to board a private jet within the hour. The authorities were on their way, but Khalid wanted to ensure Bakari didn't escape before they arrived. As the car approached the airstrip, the tension reached its peak. Khalid and Amara spotted Bakari near the hangar, surrounded by a group of armed men. The jet's engines roared, ready for takeoff. Khalid signaled his team to stop the car at a safe distance. He turned to Amara, his expression serious. "Stay here." "No," she said firmly. "I'm coming with you." "Amara, please." "No," she interrupted. "I've spent too long letting people fight my battles. This ends today." Khalid saw the fire in her eyes and knew he couldn't deny her. Together, they stepped out of the car and approached the hangar, Khalid's security team close behind. Bakari noticed them immediately, his face twisting into a smug grin. "Well, well," he said, his voice dripping with mockery. "Mr. Al-Farouk and his pet. What a surprise." Amara bristled at his words, but Khalid placed a steadying hand on her shoulder. "It's over, Bakari," Khalid said, his voice icy. "Your empire is crumbling, and you have nowhere to run." Bakari chuckled darkly. "You think this is over? Men like me don't fall because of a few papers. I'll rebuild, and when I do, I'll make sure you both pay." Khalid took a step closer, his calm demeanor unshaken. "That won't happen." At that moment, the sound of sirens filled the air. Police vehicles swarmed the airstrip, their lights flashing as officers poured out, guns drawn. Bakari's men scrambled, but they were quickly subdued. Bakari's grin faltered as the realization sank in. "You think you've won?" he spat. Khalid leaned in, his voice low and steady. "You lost the moment you underestimated her." Bakari was handcuffed and led away, his bravado replaced by anger and fear. Amara watched in silence, her heart pounding as years of fear and pain began to lift. Khalid turned to her, his eyes searching hers. "It's over," he said softly. Tears welled in her eyes as she nodded. "It's over." That night, back at the estate, Amara stood in the garden, the cool breeze brushing her face. Khalid joined her, his presence a comforting warmth. "I don't know how to thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You don't have to," he replied. "Your freedom is thanks enough." As the stars sparkled above them, Amara turned to Khalid, a smile breaking through her tears. "For the first time in a long time, I feel free." "And for the first time," Khalid said, his voice soft, "I feel like I've done something that truly matters." Their journey had been harrowing, but in that moment they both knew it was only the beginning of something new, a life shaped not by fear or power, but by horror. The morning after Bakari's arrest, the world felt different for Amara. For the first time in years, she woke up without the heavy weight of fear pressing on her chest. Sunlight filtered through the sheer curtains of her room in Khalid's estate, and for once she allowed herself to savor it. She wasn't a captive anymore. She was free. As she descended the grand staircase, she heard the faint murmur of voices coming from the dining room. Khalid was seated at the head of the table, speaking quietly with one of his assistants. His usually sharp demeanor was relaxed, his focus shifting as Amara entered the room. "Good morning," Khalid greeted, standing as she approached. "Good morning," Amara replied, her voice soft but steady. Khalid dismissed his assistant and gestured for her to join him at the table. A breakfast spread awaited them. Fresh fruit, warm pastries, and steaming cups of tea. It was a scene she could only have dreamed of months ago. "You look well," Khalid said as they sat. "How are you feeling?" Amara took a moment to consider her answer. "Free," she said finally, her lips curving into a small smile. Khalid nodded, his expression warm. "You earned it." For a moment, they ate in comfortable silence, the air between them lighter than it had ever been. But Amara couldn't ignore the question lingering in her mind. "What happens now?" she asked, setting her fork down. Khalid leaned back in his chair, his thoughtful gaze meeting hers. "That depends on you," he said. "Your family is safe now, and you're free to return to them if that's what you want. But if you choose to stay, I'll help you rebuild your life here. You have a brilliant mind, Amara. I'd be honored to have you join my company." The offer caught her off guard. "You'd do that for me?" Khalid nodded. "You've proven your resilience, your intelligence, and your strength. Those are qualities I value. But more than that, I want you to have options, real choices, something I suspect you haven't had for a long time." Amara felt a lump rise in her throat. For so long, her life had been dictated by others, by debt, by fear, by circumstance. Now, for the first time, she had the power to decide her own future. "I'll think about it," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Later that day, Amara ventured into the gardens she had grown to love. The air was crisp, the scent of jasmine and roses lingering as she walked along the winding paths. She paused by the fountain, her reflection rippling in the water as memories of her journey surfaced. The sound of footsteps behind her broke her reverie. She turned to see Khalid approaching, his hands in his pockets, his expression calm yet unreadable. "You've been quiet," he said, stopping a few steps away. "I've had a lot to think about," she admitted. Khalid nodded, his gaze fixed on the fountain. "I meant what I said this morning. Whatever you choose, I'll support you." Amara studied him, the man who had transformed from a distant figure of power to someone she trusted implicitly. "Why did you help me?" she asked, the question that had lingered in her mind finally escaping. Khalid's jaw tightened slightly as he considered his response. "Because I saw myself in you," he said finally. "When I started my career, I faced my own battles. Not the same as yours, but battles nonetheless. I had people who helped me, who gave me a chance when I needed it most. I wouldn't be where I am today without them. Helping you felt right." Amara's chest tightened at his words. "You've done more for me than anyone ever has. I don't know how I can ever repay you." "You already have," Khalid said, his voice soft. "You reminded me why I do what I do, why power and wealth mean nothing without purpose." Their eyes met, a moment of understanding passing between them. Amara felt an overwhelming wave of gratitude, not just for what Khalid had done, but for the person he had shown himself to be. "Khalid," she began, her voice trembling slightly, "I've decided. I want to stay. I want to build a life here, a life I can be proud of." Khalid's lips curved into a rare, genuine smile. "I'm glad to hear that," he said. "We'll make it happen, together." That evening, Khalid called his team to begin the process of integrating Amara into his company. He assigned her a mentor, someone who could guide her through the world of business, and ensured she had every resource she needed to succeed. Amara threw herself into her new role with determination, learning quickly and proving herself to be an asset to Khalid's team. As weeks turned into months, she found herself growing not only professionally, but personally. For the first time, she felt truly in control of her destiny. Khalid, too, found his life changing. His bond with Amara deepened, and he realized that her presence had brought a light to his world he hadn't known was missing. One evening, as they stood together on the balcony overlooking the city, Khalid turned to Amara. "You've come a long way," he said. "So have you," she replied, smiling. He hesitated for a moment before speaking again. "Amara, whatever the future holds, I want you to know that you'll always have a place here, with me." Tears welled in her eyes, but they were tears of joy, of gratitude, of hope. "Thank you, Khalid, for everything." Under the stars, they stood together, two lives forever changed by an unlikely bond. Their journey had been filled with pain and struggle, but it had led them to a place of healing, growth, and a new beginning. Months turned into a year, and Amara's transformation was remarkable. From a woman trapped by circumstance, she had risen to become a key figure in Khalid's company. Her ideas were innovative, her leadership inspiring, and her resilience unmatched. Khalid watched her growth with pride. Together, they launched initiatives to help others who had been exploited like Amara, creating opportunities for those who had none. Their work not only made headlines but touched lives in ways neither of them could have imagined. One evening, Khalid handed Amara a folder containing the deeds to her family's land back in Africa. "I wanted you to have this," he said. Amara's hands trembled as she opened it, tears streaming down her face. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "You've earned it," Khalid replied, his voice filled with warmth. The gala was a celebration of their success, a night to honor the impact they had made together. Amara stood at Khalid's side, her confidence radiating as she addressed the crowd, sharing her story of survival and triumph. When the applause faded, Khalid turned to her. "You've come so far, Amara. I couldn't be prouder." She smiled, her eyes glistening. "I couldn't have done it without you." As they looked out over the sea of faces, united in a mission of hope and change, they knew this was only the beginning. Together, they had built something greater than themselves, a legacy of courage, compassion, and perseverance. If this story touched your heart, remember that no challenge is too great to overcome when we have courage and compassion. Let Amara and Khalid's journey inspire you to make a difference in your own life. Subscribe to our channel, like this video, and share it with someone who needs to hear this story. Together, we can spread hope and light.